Greetings friends, Dragon here once again. If it is your first time visiting the channel, do please consider giving me a subscribe and a like, a comment below this video. All that good YouTube stuff is a huge help. I know I sound like a broken record every time that I say that stuff, but it really does make a huge difference. So today, following on from yesterday's Wheels on Meals, getting into Dragons Forever, I always think of the two as pretty much going hand in hand. Slightly spread apart in years. Wheels on Meals was 84, this was 1988, and was the last time that we would see the three kind of main leads acting together on screen. So directed or co-directed, depending on which version of the credits you see, by Sammo Hung and Corey Yuen, and starring Jackie Chan, Yuen Biao, and Sammo Hung himself. It's Cantonese title, Fei Lung Mang Zhong, which sort of roughly translates as Flying Dragon Super General or Super Leader, but that has no bearing obviously on what's going on in the film. In Japanese it was Cyclone Z, and this release, the 88 Films release, has three different versions of the film on here. So we get the Hong Kong cut, the international English release version, and the Japanese cut, which is slightly longer, and we'll kind of cover some of the differences between the different cuts. So like yesterday's, this will not be spoiler free, so if you haven't seen the movie, maybe bookmark the vid, go away, check out the film and come back. Alternatively, I will at some point put in chapter stops underneath and you can skip past if you just want information on the discs. That will come towards the end of the video. So our basic premise, Jackie's playing a lawyer. Jackie's character is called Jackie Lung, who at the beginning of the movie we find is defending a guy who's up on rape charges. He tries to coerce the person that he's accused of attacking into dropping the case, but then ends up managing to win the case for the guy through a bit of a legal technicality, and then beats the guy in the courtroom, which we'd seen in a couple of other Jackie movies too. I think it's a New Police Story. He protects somebody as a cop and then turns on them as soon as he can, so kind of showing that he's somewhat conflicted even though he's having to represent somebody who's pretty dodgy. Anyway, so he's playing a bit of a sleazy kind of womanizing lawyer, a different type of performance than we'd sort of seen from Jackie, but I think all three of them were trying to flex a bit more into more dramatic territory and try and play parts that they maybe hadn't played before, or rather characters that they hadn't played before. So Sammo is playing Wong Fei Hung. The only comparisons to other Wong Fei Hung in name alone, here he is a weapons dealer or an arms dealer, which I don't remember as being a part of any other Wong Fei Hung interpretations. And Yuen Biao is playing Tung Tak Kiao, who's a kind of cat burglar stroke psychopath, or well, psychopath maybe a bit harsh, psychotic is maybe a bit more appropriate. So a guy with some mental issues, and kind of one of the subplots for his character is his frequent visits or frequent references to the fact that he's having to speak to a psychiatrist to try and work through some of his problems. And in the Japanese cut we see the psychiatrist scenes, the psychiatrist played by Stanley Fung, who you'll recognise from the Lucky Stars trilogy of movies, and that's one of the key differences between the different cuts, is we get the sequences with him visiting his psychiatrist a couple of times throughout the movie, which kind of overall make the flow of the narrative make a bit more sense. Again, we'll get to that a little bit later. So our other supporting characters, on the girls' side, we have former Miss Hong Kong Pauline Yung playing Wen Mai Ling. She's a geologist who's been brought on in the main course that takes on the bulk of the film's narrative, where Yuen Hua's evil, villainous, part drug smuggling, drug company running businessman, his factory's leaking water leaking toxic water out into the fish farm that's run by owned by Dini Yip's character. She's playing Miss Yip. And there's a court case which Jackie gets involved in to try and initially defend Yuen Hua's company against Dini Yip. So he recruits his two friends in order to try and help him in this task. He tries to get Sammo Hung to woo Dini Yip and then get her to drop the case, and he himself attempts to try and woo Pauline Young's character as a way of trying to get an insight into what information she has for the court case, or try and sway the court case. And as the narrative kind of goes on, they kind of realise that they're probably on the wrong side and switch sides, to end up going up against Yuen Hua, who's ably assisted by, as Kung Fu Bob's spectacular cover art for this release shows us by Benny the Jet Arguides and Billy Chow are taking over from. We saw Keith Vitale along with Benny Arguides and Wheels on Meals yesterday, so Billy Chow is stepping in place of Keith Vitale and is a welcome sight here. It's always good seeing Billy Chow. He was a pretty formidable kickboxer, a tremendous villain in Fist of Legend, and so whilst he's more on kind of henchman duties here, it's still great to see him. And the last reel, where most of the real magic for this film is for me, he stars pretty heavily and gets to kind of go up against Yuen Bo. So the film was released in time for Chinese New Year, and Chinese New Year movies are always good fun in terms of the amount of actors that they're able to cram into them. So there's an enormous amount of cameos, particularly from a whole bunch of Shaw's actors and other kind of notable stuntmen from different films. I'm sure I didn't catch all of them, but the ones I spotted, I mean, Dick Wave features pretty prominently. One of my favourite villains, Feng Harkon, is here. We get Lau Kar Lung's brother, Lau Kar Wing, again as a henchman. Also Wang Yu, young Wang Yu, not Jimmy Wang Yu from One Armed Swordsman, but young Wang Yu from Dirty Hole makes an appearance here, as does Xiao Ho, another Lau Kar Lung regular, though he's got blink and you'll miss him appearances really as just one of the bunch of stuntmen stroke henchmen that are in the background. There's one tiny little brief scene with Lo Lei, the original Pa Mei. We see Tai Po, who you might know from Ninja and the Dragon's Den, as the kind of host of a cruise lining restaurant that they visit at one point. And we see Philip Ko, who again's got a slightly larger part. So Philip Ko's got a slight speaking performance, a few lines in this, as somebody who reluctantly ends up joining Yunhua's crew. Philip Ko is the abbot in 8 Diagram Pole Fighter. It's always great seeing him here. We also have Crystal Kwok playing Jackie's legal secretary. We covered her pretty recently when we spoke about Jet Li's The Master. She's the main female character in that movie. It's got a slightly smaller part here, but she's in some ways, I think maybe comes off a little bit better in this one. The character that she has to play in The Master's pretty set upon. Here she's set upon in a slightly different way, but kind of fights her own corner a little bit more. So yeah, she's great to see here. And I think that's our principal. So there's, of the 7 little fortunes that Jackie, Yuen Biao and Sammo Hung were 3 of, we actually get 5, possibly 6 in this if we count Yunhua and we count the director Corey Yuen, who are both members of the same troupe. There's also a tiny, again, blink and you'll miss him cameo by Yuen Mo, who is another one of the fortunes. So technically 6. If anybody spotted Yuen Tak anywhere in this, then do please let me know. I couldn't spot him. And I'm sure there's a whole bunch of other people who I didn't kind of mention who are in here too, because it really does have a couple of sequences where there's almost an entire roster of Hong Kong stuntmen making an appearance. So the film was shot over a really short period. It was 40 days compared to almost 3 months that they spent shooting Wheels on Meals. So it can feel a tiny bit more disjointed. There was 2 separate units working. So Jackie Chan's stunt crew was working, as was Sammo Hung's, and they kind of divided their duties between a lot of the scenes. So the Sammo sequences, when he's on his own, were all shot by Sammo's crew. Jackie's sequences all shot by Jackie's crew, and at certain points I think they probably came together, but apparently they were working back to back, so they were just racing against the clock to try and get this out in time for New Year. And it was released on the 11th of February 1988, so literally just in time for Chinese New Year. It still has probably one of the best last reels, certainly of where the 3 of them appear together. The last reel in this probably tops Wheels on Meals slightly for action. I do prefer the Benny the Jet and Jackie battle. There's a little fly buzzing around. God damn it. I do prefer overall I prefer the fight in Wheels on Meals between the 2 of them slightly more, but I think the inclusion of Yunhua here as the cigar puffing, tremendously almost pantomime villain in this maybe kind of raises the bar slightly. So I don't know, ask me on different days and one will top the other for me. I still think Wheels on Meals is possibly the slightly better film in a purely film critic-y sense, but this is probably the better action movie. The action sequences are sprinkled throughout the film a little bit better. There's also a lot more opportunities for the 3 of them to kind of spar off against each other. Imagine like the 3 Stooges if they knew martial arts. So the scenes when the 3 of them kind of fight, not really for keeps, but are just kind of battling each other in the moment are really good fun, and a good mixture of kind of some of the hits being played for laughs and then genuinely being pretty impressive at how fast they move and how incredible they are at working with each other. So I think there's a couple of sequences throughout the film where the three of them kind of go at it, and it's always really a bit of a delight to see. There's a great sequence which is really a sort of Jackie standalone on his own sequence on a cruise ship where he's attacked by, as mentioned, half of Hong Kong's stunt roster who were available at the time. And there's some great stunts in amongst that, and some tremendous choreography. That's really where we see the bulk of the Dick Wei and Lau Kar Wing sequences, and the only place that I spotted Wang Yu. So the boat sequence is tremendous. It's kind of almost a great little standalone vignette of action. And as somebody mentioned in the comments yesterday, I think it was maybe Perry Fan, thank you very much for watching yesterday. This one's a great time capsule for seeing Hong Kong of the 80s. So a lot of the outside locations are really good. There's kind of minimal work on a soundstage. It's really only the last sequence that takes place on a set in Golden Harvest, but the rest of the film's kind of out and about, and a lot of kind of actual real world city locations, which is kind of cool to see. So much in the same way as Enter the Dragon showed us the harbour of the 1970s, this shows us the Hong Kong harbour of the 1980s, which is pretty cool. I think the running time differences between the different versions, the Hong Kong version and the international version both run at 94 minutes. The Japanese release is 98 minutes. So it's not a huge amount longer, but we do get the two sequences with the psychiatrist office back in, one of which does slightly affect the narrative, where the first time we see Yuen Biao going to visit him, they have got pretty good kind of comedy exchange when they kind of go back and forth and speak about morality and how much Yuen Biao's struggling with his place within society, and particularly in relation to some of his friends, and they swap places between doctor and patient a couple of points, trading the kind of the couch for the chair, which is pretty cool. Stanley Fung's always entertaining to see, and although he's got a tiny part here, he's really good. And then the second time when Yuen Biao goes back to visit him, the office is being robbed, so he never actually makes it up into the office. He's just speaking through the intercom. One of the robbers tells him the best way to deal with the situation is to wipe out any witnesses, and that way he won't go to jail. And so that's what motivates him to go back. There's a sequence when he breaks in and tries to attack Pauline Young's character, and that, without the second psychiatrist scene, didn't make a huge amount of sense the first time I watched the movie. This time round, it was a little bit more understandable, because you sort of see that he's been motivated to do it by speaking to the robber. I would say if you get this version, do watch the Japanese cut. It also has all of the outtakes, or the no good shots at the end, because I think they were contractually obliged to put them into the Japanese releases. So it's always cool kind of seeing where things haven't gone quite right, or seeing some of the flub takes and stuff. All of that you'll see over the end credits in the end of the Japanese cut. I replaced my old DVD version from Hong Kong Legends with this version, and some of the extras from this are ported over. Specifically, there's a really good Billy Chow special feature when Billy Chow came back to do a kickboxing match probably around the time this was released, so early 2000s, 2005, and they feature the full match, so you get a chance to see a kickboxing match with Billy Chow, interspersed with interviews from some of his friends. So see Ken Lo and see Chin Soo Ho, kind of, who joined him ringside, and both sort of speak about their relation to him, how they got to know him, and it's kind of cool to see. And it ends with a pretty long, really substantial interview with Billy Chow himself. It's also pretty cool to see. So that was one of the extras that I'm kind of most glad that they ported over. And it's also a short feature on, get this right, make sure that they've included the right ones. So we get Double Jeopardy with Brad Allen, Beyond Gravity with Joe Igo, and Kick Fighter with Andy Cheng. All those three were ported over as well, and they've also made some new little shorts themselves. So there's a quick chat with Mike Leader on the streets of Hong Kong, which is pretty cool, when he speaks about his own relationship with the movie when he first saw it, and his transition into moving to Hong Kong. We got commentary with Mike Leader again with Arnie Venema. That's pretty cool, very informal, just a kind of gentle chat between two guys who are clearly friends, and speak a little bit about partly what you're seeing on screen, but an awful lot about their own kind of experiences in Hong Kong, and that's overall a really good listen. It's a different type of commentary to the one that we saw on the old Hong Kong Legends disc, which was a solo effort. This one's, like I say, a bit more informal. It's a bit less fact-filled, but still really good, still really entertaining. And that is the bulk of your new footage that's been made, I think. There is a very short The Legacy of Dragons Forever featurette, which is kind of a couple of minutes long and cuts together a few talking heads shots from everyone else. And there's also an updated interview with Jude Poyer, who Jude Poyer is nice to see coming back into these releases again. He was on commentary duties on a couple of the Hong Kong Legends discs. I think he did Police Story 2 and Story of Ricky, maybe a few others. And I remember from back when BBC years ago did their kind of Kung Fu night, he was one of the talking heads in the Kung Fu fighting documentary that they made that was really, really good. And it's great seeing him still looking good and still very active. I think he's moved back to the UK now, but he speaks about his perspective of working with Yuen Biao and with Sammo Hung, and his sort of attitude to all three of their movies independently is pretty cool. And so that felt like it was one of the ones that they filmed specifically for this set. And there's also an interview with a film teacher from the States called David Desser, and he kind of gives a good overview of our three main leads and their movies in general, and then speaks a little bit about Dragons Forever too. So I think a really good extras bundle, and if we're comparing this purely on Blu-ray releases, this absolutely takes the biscuit over Meals on Wheels. It's a much more loaded set. We get the different cuts of the movie and we get a lot more extras. The Wheels on Meals release was a bit more Spartan. There was a lot less stuff included on it. It was really just trailers and a couple of interviews, which were mostly all ported over from older releases on the Eureka side on Wheels on Meals. So 88 kind of pushed out the boat a little bit more. And if you can track down one of the limited edition versions, which comes with a slip, you also get the great booklet. And I was chatting it away to one of you about the booklet, so I'll spend a bit of time going through this. This is predominantly a few different articles. I think taken from Dragons Remembered. So the first one's by Scott Harrison. It's called The Difficult Third Movie. Then we get a separate section taken from Jackie Chan Inside the Dragon. And we get a few other little quotes taken from one from the Austin Chronicle original review, presumably from Mark Savlov, and one from Kung Fu Cult Masters, taken from Bruce Lee to Crouching Tiger by Leon Hunt in 2003. So a couple of good extracts from different books. We've got a whole bunch of in-film stills. And then it moves through into some of our poster art. There are really quite a few pages of in-film stills. Then we've got kind of one of the original theatrical posters. And then some of the worldwide posters. So the Thai and the Japanese poster with the Cyclone Z title. And some of the European releases. So I think we get the German art, Spanish, and then we also get the Pakistani and the international poster, and a Korean poster too. And over here, I think they've given us a couple of behind-the-scenes documents from the Composers and Authors Society of Hong Kong, and the cover of the Japanese soundtrack. We get some Golden Harvest press releases. And then the lobby card set, which is kind of nice to see reproduced here, because the lobby card sets are pretty expensive if you track them down, so it's nice getting a more kind of handheld size of these that you can kind of flick through. And then it ends up with some behind the scenes stills, so you get a couple of pages worth of shots taken from during the filming. That are all pretty cool to see too. So overall, I think it's a really great package for what is a tremendous film. It still holds up. It's one that I've seen more times than I could mention, and still enjoy every time I watch through. So I think of all of the different available versions there are out there, I think there's a Fortune Star release from Hong Kong of this as well, which I've not had a chance to check out, but I presume it's the original or very similar kind of source negative that they've taken the restorations from. I think 88 Films did their own, so if anybody's got both, do please let me know in the comments how they compare from a picture point of view. But certainly this seems to be the one that's the most loaded in terms of extras, and well worth tracking down. So yeah, check back in tomorrow for another classic review, because there's still a whole bunch of movies that have been out for a little while that I haven't got around to reviewing, and I'm going to be trying to do a Sammo movie every day until we get to the end of the competition on the 14th of June. So we've got another week and a bit left before we get there. Do please enter the competition if you haven't already done so. There's a copy of Spooky Encounters up for grabs. The competition launch videos on the main page. I'll also leave a link at the end of this, so you can click straight on over to it if you haven't already. But thank you very much for watching. Let me know what you think of the movie in the comments below, or any other Sammo movies you'd like me to cover. We'll be getting into the other big ones, and certainly I think next up's going to be the 3 films by Sammo Hung box set that came out on Eureka. So we'll get into Eastern Condors, Magnificent Butcher and Iron Fisted Monk over the next couple of days. Thank you very much for watching. Cheers. Take care.